Hello, and welcome to our second webinar of Skills from the Field, Learning to Thrive in Isolation. I'm Kristen Rodzinyak, and I'm here with Bernd Weiss, who is the founder of Space Careers and Leadership Center, which was built to found a global ecosystem for careers, leadership, and entrepreneurship in space. And it has a couple different functions, looking at helping build leadership and performance coaching, career workshops, entrepreneurship education, career events, and skills training. And that brings us to our topic for today, which we have Anthony Byrne here with us. And we're going to talk a little bit about some professionals sharing their best and most important skills, hopefully for our audience that they can learn some direct applicable skills or thoughts. Anthony Byrne is inspired by the application of space technology to deliver solutions that have critical positive impacts on lives and society. Mr. Burns acts as a consultant for government, commercial, and nonprofit agencies to access geospatial and analytical tools for economic and environmental missions. Previous work with the United Nations focused on adapting emerging technologies for disaster management and the Center for the Advancement of Science in Space. This is also looking at how satellite technology can support human progress at the International Space Station. Mr. Byrne also volunteers with conservation charities in South Africa, improving animal tracking through low-tech, low-cost satellite solutions. He's a graduate of the dual executive MBA program at the IE Business School and Brown University, as well as an alum of the International Space University Summer Space Program. And without any further ado, I'll let Anthony take it from here.
Thank you, Kristen. Yes, I think it's a great pleasure to be able to join you all today. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to talk about how you get to certain places in your career, and I think it's really important. I think with the kind of special world that space is, to have opportunities to discuss and explore very practical ways of how to push your career in different directions, because certainly that reflects my odd career, as I would call it, in the sense that, firstly, I don't have an engineering degree, and I certainly don't have a space engineering degree. So I certainly enjoyed that when I was at ISU. My background came out of a combination of humanities and physical sciences and biological sciences. And for a long time, I was involved in more in the communications and lobbying and politics, and then commercial development around space. But my heart and passion was always particularly around in developments, whether those are large development issues around climate change or food security, or vector-borne disease movement, of which these are projects and things I was passionate about: animal conservation, wildlife. And they're always sort of on the side. There were always things that I did voluntarily. So as I progressed through my aerospace and then my sort of space career, I always wanted to bring those together and was trying to think of ways to do that. The way I got there, actually, and it shows that you can get to here from almost anywhere, was through space applications, was through thinking an awful lot about what space has built up collectively in terms of obviously satellite technology and imaging and sensing and satellite comm and sat nav, all of these things that the industry has built, whether it's on with civilian government or defense over the years. And there was always a question in my head that I also explored at ISU linked to that, which is that people always tend to think of space as outward focused, outward looking, obviously off planet, and all of that's very good and very important. But I've also constantly faced, whether I was working in the UK, in Europe, or here in North America, the question of, well, why does space matter, and how does space help us with the practical problems of the world? I'd always get questions like, well, how does space feed anybody? How does space matter when we've got so many problems here at home? And so, I was very aware of that because of my personal passion. So I really became focused on how can I, move into a space which connects space and advanced sciences, advanced tech, essentially, to sort of the really most pressing problems that we on Earth face. And I found that way through putting everything together, thinking a lot around how we commandeer the assets essentially that we have and the expertise that we have, and the incredible research assets that we have to solve problems here. And what I realized the most important thing is firstly is working your career towards thinking around problems and spending 99% of your time thinking about the problems before you really look to build out solutions. And that's when you realize that it's not about building tech for tech's sake. It's about adapting the things that we already have, and making them go a lot further by making them matter to, in some parts of the world, very remote, very disconnected parts of the globe, which can only really access the kind of space-enabled technology that we take for granted, only under special circumstances or with a large effort. So that's where I got into it, because I realized that I didn't actually need to have an advanced engineering degree to do those things. What I needed really was to take all of my passions and background to date, put them together, and focus on solutions and impact, and getting help work with partners who want to get the things that everybody needs all over the world into their hands in very practical ways. So that because I've always used this example. The vast majority of people in the world, when they look at their mobile phone and they're thinking, okay, I need to get from A to B, are not thinking about sat nav. They're not thinking about the kind of satellite assets that helps them get there. They're thinking about something very practical. How do they get from here to there? And how could they get here to there if they were in very remote areas or very constrained areas, and it still work? And so that's that kind of very practical problem solving that draws on a very different skill set than the ones that I think most people expect when they think about entering the space industry.
Awesome. Thank you. I liked how you touched on that you don't necessarily need a technical engineering degree to really make a benefit in space. And do you think that really benefited you, is being able to view the problem from a different angle, having more of a humanities, having a business background, that somebody who's very focused on the details, the math, the mechanics of it would bring to the table?
I think so. I mean, certainly, and don't get me wrong, it certainly helps to have, it can never hurt to have an engineering background. But what I was able to always to focus on with that was the so what question. And that was always the question I asked myself and others when somebody brought, a piece of technology or an exciting opportunity that, as they saw it, had been working on something, they were passionate about it. And, if they came from sometimes a very strict engineering background, they would really focus on the technology or the engineering solution behind it. And I would wait patiently and then say, okay, but so what? Who does this move the needle for? Are there all of these practical questions around who could adopt this? How could they use it? Are there any unintended consequences? And so I always naturally came down to to thinking from the user's side, from the partner side. And that, I think, has been helpful. I think in some cases, you always need folk with these sorts of things to sort of ask those questions and then push through and always be on the side of the end user. So yeah, I certainly think I know enough about space engineering now to be able to get by, but I don't think that it has hurt me at all not being able to go into very deep dives with certain solutions. When I need that, I obviously have friends and partners and colleagues who are quite capable of doing that.
And another aspect that you brought, and my question is kind of geared to students or recent grads who are, at this time right now, they're just finishing up their degrees or they're looking for jobs, and now might not be the most positive time to be looking for a job because there's a lot of additional challenges that not a lot of us were looking for. And so one of the words of advice that you had was that this allowed you to bring your passions together. And that's kind of the same advice I was given by one of my supervisors when I remember I was looking at what am I going to do with my life, and that anxiety and that freaking out when you're like, oh my goodness, I'm about to graduate. Now I have to go find a real job. I have to do something else with my life, and what's that going to be? And, follow your passion, and that a path kind of makes itself clear. So what kind of advice would you have for someone that at this time is not really sure what they want to do with their life, and how would they kind of help kind of gear towards a career path?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I certainly, wish I'd examined or taken this approach more when I was, when I first graduated. And I will say that actually, it's great to be graduating now in many ways, just in terms of the maturity of the industry and the sector, and the fact that now space has solutions and services and opportunities in almost any sector, which wouldn't necessarily have been the case when I first started out. But because it is the case now, I think that is the way. And always run that test of yourself, I think, because I had done this to myself over the years when I've been stuck in a rut, is to say, what am I spending the majority of my leisure time pursuing? What do I get really passionate about and look forward to? What do I really care about? And so in my case, for instance, one of those things is climate change, and another one of those things is vaccines and bringing vaccines to the world and extending the power of vaccines. And I thought, well, okay, well, is that or space? And then realized actually space is hugely important to both. So start actually with that sense of thinking, what could I bring with my degree in a background in space or a discipline related to space that could actually take one of those things that you're passionate about and see if there is a way of bringing that together. And I'd say it's surprising how often, once you start to do the research, how quickly you find a path. And because you're working backwards and not trying to sort of follow the flow of thinking, well, I need to go this route, I need to have this, like this little milestone touched off, I need to go here and work for this company. Actually, one or two things in my experience happens. One of them is you're actually finding there's less competition in the niche that you're pursuing, because obviously one of the first things as a recent graduate is there's all these other graduates trying to do what you're doing. So if you're wanting to go and work for NASA or Airbus, or any of these, large sort of space companies or engineering firms, you're up against a lot of graduates, and there's only so many slots. And that can be bruising, and you can often end up in places you don't want to end up in, and you don't feel passionate about it. Conversely, if you actually go from the other way around and are prepared to learn and to think and be adaptable, you can find not only do you end up in a place you care about so much more quickly, but there's actually less competition because not so many people have gone down the same pathway. Um, and they don't actually realize they can do what they can actually do and what you would be doing maybe 3, 4, 5 years further down the track in their career, in which case you'll already be established and contributing. If I give a practical example from my own life, you mentioned the conservation tracking, which I did in South Africa, which was just caring about big cats and knowing that there was a problem with a lot of the GPS collars they used to have, the big heavy collars that they put on these cats, and it was just the number of issues around how the animal welfare and how the cat responded. Just it was cumbersome, and there's been this movement towards what's cheaper and more effective and less disturbing for the cats, and it was moving to things like alpha trackers and all these sorts of practical things. And suddenly I found that I had value because I know about those things. I care about those things. It's a space application or a space enabled application, obviously using GPS. So suddenly I was part of a conversation with a bunch of conservationists and got to go down to South Africa and experience that, and did something similar a few years later on the health side, in which I'm part of a useful conversation. I have a niche. It's a very enjoyable niche. It's part of a larger collective, and I can add some value. But I'm now applying this into my day job. I actually found these were volunteer projects that became part of my day job, which was this larger questions around conservation and environment and habitats and other things that large NGOs are very interested in.
I think that's everybody's dream job, is being able to take the whatever you are really passionate about and find a way to get paid to do it. um, my next question is, what is the largest challenge that you encounter working in the space world? Like working people coming from different technical backgrounds, language barriers, time zones, cultural differences. I mean, even right now, I'm here in Canada, you're in the US, and Baron's joining us from Germany. So even just, coordinating a time that works for all of us, that's just a small challenge. But from your experience, what has been the largest challenge that you've encountered?
I would say the largest challenge in my space has actually been the making. It goes back to making what we do really matter and really have an impact in very constrained environments. in which you're dealing with communities that have very near-term problems. That which space can seem a long way away initially in terms of mattering. So the example I can think of is some of the big climate change projects in the South Pacific that I've been involved in, the small islands like Fiji and Vanuatu, where in some places you can get connectivity maybe once a day, where people are dealing with impact of extreme weather events, land degradation, all kinds of very practical issues. And when you're there with those communities and you work with NGOs and governments, and you sort of come with these proposals in which what you worked out in North America and Europe was, seemed very elegant and sensible, and you did all the user requirements, you did everything right, and yet, you get down there and these great plans don't always survive collisions with these realities that they're facing. And it's there that it's easy to get disheartened or discouraged or think I'm not really adding much, or maybe we'll fall back on some classic hardware solution and not try to work with the new things that the industry is developing, which are potentially very powerful. But you have to then spend time to work on communication and lateral and customer discovery and all these, again, these other skills from business and humanities and social sciences. And you realize that is, again, vast majority of the solution comes from that, and only a little bit comes from the technical understanding of what the space products can do. Because you kind of have to do all of that discovery first, and all of that thinking, all the hard work. And I think the hardest bit of space in terms of making it matter for the Earth, if you like, is the impacts. Space is very good at creating indicators. A lot of advanced technology is good at creating indicators, which is great for research. It's great for sort of large scale policy, but it is not so good for measurable impacts on people's lives. So that collectively in industry we can say space matters, and it matters more than for more than just our future outwards, but also inwards. There's a lot of things that if they build it, they will it'll solve everything mindset, which I think is the other problem when I'm back in the industry sometimes, is still working with teams who are like, this will be great, this will be amazing, this will fix everything, and they haven't touched foot in these countries, they haven't talked to a community, and they don't really understand the sense of the challenges until they're down there. But if you have to wait for someone to get down there who's an engineer working on something to realize the limitations they're up against from the user side, then you can lose months, if not years, of real work, because what you've built just isn't going to work.
So it sounds like doing your background homework is very important. I know I come from a geology background, and I know my PhD supervisor told me he had spent all this time in the lab doing these experiments, and he went to the first conference to present, and then somebody in the audience was like, oh, have you read these papers? It turned out somebody had kind of basically already done exactly what he did, and not having that background knowledge, you end up wasting a lot of time. And I think that collaborative nature is something that really drew me to space. And then I guess you kind of already touched on this, but I don't know if you want to kind of just give a succinct one-word answer. But this question comes up a lot when I'm doing presentations, as well as the money behind space. We see these budgets, we see these projects of how much a satellite costs, how much the space budget is, and that becomes kind of a when you're talking about prioritizing budgets, and why is space important, and what do you think the largest benefit space can provide? So when that question comes up is do we really need to spend this money on space technologies? Why should we? If you're talking to someone who's not Barron and I are already very convinced of the importance of the space world, but when you're interacting with somebody who hasn't drunk the space Kool-Aid and is absolutely in love with the space world already, what can you tell them that really clinches that message home of, yes, it's worth investing in the space industry, and what the benefit, looking inward, not just looking outward, learning more about the universe, but kind of those direct benefits directly to society. What can we learn from doing space work that we can maybe apply to other industries as well?
That's a great question. And I think about this a lot, and there's sort of, yes, it's hard to get it down to the elevator pitch, really, but I'd say there's a couple of things that keep being true for me. The first one is space is an incredible enabler of so many technologies, so many other solutions, because it's, you know, it's able to drive data. It's able to, you know, it's one of the most powerful sectors in terms of collecting, sorting, aggregating data and making that data matter, showing the patterns on a large scale as well as very small particular scales. So it's very adept, and therefore you find it at the heart of many solutions, whether it's commercial solutions, driving your mobile phone, or whether it's solutions around crop yields, or, you know, fishermen in Lake Victoria in Uganda that needs critical weather information to know whether they should go out on a lake. These are micro decisions that have big impacts on people's lives and livelihoods, and it's all space enabled. So that's the first one, is that space is important to invest in because it enables, it's a multiplier for so many other things. The second thing is, I would never use the word objective, because anyone in space knows, first of all, that objective data is not really true, and also because space itself, if you're talking about imagery, everyone knows you need to ground truth satellite imagery, because what you see from there, as powerful it is, isn't always there. But when space is properly invested in, one advantage it has is that it is able to collect so much data relatively quickly and put it in the hands of, you know, there's so many fantastic, whether it's machine or human crowdsourcing solutions, AI aggregate solutions, to draw out key information, key data, which can drive impact, and do it relatively objectively compared to other disciplines, other ways of collecting that data, which can often be collected in much more subjective or restricted ways. And I think that, you know, again, if you were to lose the eye in the sky, so to speak, from space, I think you know, whether we're tracking climate change or any of these other big global issues at a global level, you would lose a lot of ability to draw out the key patterns that drive decision making for everybody.
Cool. So now you've been talking these pretty big scale, these big ideas right now. So I'm gonna kind of bring it back to some smaller detail. So people kind of stuck at home and changing their lifestyle from before. Um, do you have any advice on, you know, you previously used to do a lot of traveling for your job. So you did a lot of work in Europe, in London, in Australia, in New Zealand. So you were constantly traveling, and that was a very large part of your job. And now, obviously, you've had to adapt in the current situation. And, you know, what have you learned in kind of modifying from, you know, always being able to be there in person and the benefits of being there in person to switching to a virtual um, meeting?
Yeah, it's an adjustment for all of us, isn't it? You know, I haven't really got out of sweatpants for like a month, so that's certainly a change, and haven't been inside an airport. The truth is that the most important thing I've learned really is actually it creates more necessary trust and enablement of your in-country partners, your in-country community, even more. And I'd already did a lot of this, but even more sort of passing the baton. I mean, we get together, obviously, virtual meetings when connectivity allows. And, you know, we try to, in many cases, I'm having very intense conversations with partner governments or clients to say, okay, what can you do now without me being there? I mean, essentially, I'm going to have to rely on you even more, that what you're doing and what you're seeing and what you're observing is through your eyes only, and then, you know, sharing back to me what they see, and I then draw back on my community to help with those. So as much as that goes, it feels almost like a step back to a time in which you couldn't just travel the world this easily, and, you know, you worked very remotely, and you know, to set up little consulates or little hubs where everybody worked together and then drew back. So this kind of multi-networked approach, which I think exactly, it's almost like we're all a cluster of satellites at the moment, and we're all operating independently, and together we're creating a larger picture that still works, even if none of us can, you know, independently verify or observe ourselves. So basically, it creates even more necessity for trust and great communication and clear communication and patience with everybody I work with, because none of us are able to meet in person and try to trust this, I guess, the information we see through our own senses.
I like that you brought up communication because that ties into my my last question. But this is, again, going back to the career search because you've been able to kind of form yourself a niche, and so you've been constantly kind of um, modifying your skill set and kind of having to sell yourself to new audiences. And so for someone who's just graduating or someone who's switching career paths and isn't used to that marketing of themselves, how do you have any advice on doing interviews or updating resumes that can really come across as selling yourself without kind of oversell, like, because you don't want to lie and say you have all these skills that you don't have, but you also don't want to kind of, you do want to be able to get that next job or to be offered that scholarship. And so do you have any advice on kind of balancing that selling yourself but also trying to break into a new area that you might not have the kind of traditional background for?
That's great. Yeah, that's also an important question. And and again, through trial and error over my career, I've sort of realized actually that it's the same. You should take the same approach to that as you do to your career generally, which goes back to your passion and your ability to problem solve and bring your skill set. So for instance, if I was interviewed for a role now, and it was outside of my career directory to date, but I felt that there was something there I could bring, I would actually take that as a problem solving approach. So I would look at a role or a organization and say, okay, so this is where they're at. This is what they're advertising for. What are they really asking for? What are they really looking for? What effect do they really need that you might be able to bring? And so you flag up and you be honest, I don't have X skill that you may be looking for, may even be in the job description. However, from what I understand of the role, this is what you'd really be looking for as what this person would bring. And in that case, I could bring this and this and this, and you tell that story. So the narrative is, I'm here, and I think I could bring this to this role, to this company, and maybe there's a way that I can mitigate or learn on the job or work with others to bridge the gap and the other things you were looking for. But and so you can do it that way, and that's been successful for me. I mean, clearly, with the exception being if you're applying for something obviously very, very technical and very niche that you have no background in, that may be a hard turn too much, and you may have to think about how you bridge that gap through more training or an intermediary role. But I have found generally, if you take that approach and back yourself, you can be successful a surprising amount of the time. I
You're
can't hear
muted.
you.
You're muted.
Yeah.
I'm muted. So I'm going to turn it over to Baron, my co-host here. He has some more questions for you, so I'll let him ask you the next question.
Anthony, first of all, it was great having the big overview about all the topics is really interesting. And the final thing with like finding your passion and working on your passion, I think it's very important. Something I'm always trying to tell the people I mentor to really find for themselves. It's about outcome. Where do you want to be in 5 years? And knowing these things seem to be very vague in the moment, but we all know where we want to come to. And then so finding the passion, finding the path is very important. And that brings me to the question. At the moment, coronavirus forced all of us to stay at home, or most of us. But it also inspires us to think about what can we do with the rest of our lives. So many people have time, sit at home, and consider, we all get bombarded by online courses. We can do this, you can learn this. And there's a very overflow of information. And on the other side, we also get inspired to think about solutions, and governments already start thinking, what can we do to reboot the economies globally? And there are, like in Germany, they want to really go for maybe a green reboot. They want to do more stuff for climate change. They want to get more companies rolling maybe and support companies on the side that they can really benefit from the climate change to really use this reboot as a global thing. And I have to say, I walk every day for like at least an hour at the moment outside, and I see maybe one plane. It's amazing. Everything is blue, everything is shiny. We have people walking around. It feels like a total new earth, actually.
Yeah.
And I would really like to see this happening. But so coming to the point, many companies, countries see space industry as something always valuable for the future because it can have a very huge return on invest. But it's a long-term projects industry, basically. There are no really short projects. So considering all the details we have now for a global reboot of the economy, if you think about the space industry as an enabler to drive jobs and to really drive growth of regions, maybe like you've been in South Africa, I work with South America. In Chile, we want to try to set up the space ecosystems down there, really support the global regions around Concepcion or Santiago to really use space technology. However, what do you see in your personal opinion? What are the key areas in the space industry that can become big fast to really enable economies reboot in a more sustainable way with not too long-term investment and return on investments?
That's a great question, and I completely agree. In fact, I think that has often been an error in the assumption of particularly areas that are developing at, if you like, behind or trajectory that's behind perhaps the countries that are traditional large space economies. Is this sense of, well, we have to put this huge investments as long term in order to catch up and to be the next, North America or Europe or others, the long term legacy in space investment, because there's no shortcut to space investment. Mm-hmm. And I'd say that the shortest answer is, and that's why I think it's fantastic to set up ecosystems, and that's why I think even things like ISU is great. I don't think anywhere near has been made enough for developing regions in terms of making the most out of the assets we already have, out of the satellite assets that we already have, whether it's Earth observation, SATCOM, SatNav, enabling like microfinancing and mobile banking and things like food security, particularly tracking aspects of climate change. There's a lot now. We are awash in data, satellite enabled data, whether it's big bus data, whether it's all of the LEO data, whether it's there's planet data. There's so much commercial and government assets out there that in fact there's a lot of short to medium term direct investment back that you can make with very little expenditure if you are if governments and the commercial sector and the non-profit sector work together in, say, countries like Chile or South Africa. And I think South Africa is actually a poster child for how this can work through their space agency, to draw down the assets that are already there that don't cost much, but actually put them to use in all of the sectors and all of the programs for development, for economic development, for societal development, environmental development, that the challenges that they need to face. And by making the most of those assets that are near to hand, they're already essentially up there, you can also drive demand for the long-term investments. Because I've always said this, once any region gets a taste of the power of this data, of how useful it can be, and you can show real impact and stories of real impact, governments will invest, or other partners linked to those governments will invest. And I see this with the World Bank and other IFIs. I mean, they've been prepared to invest in big programs, procuring and developing satellites and space technology, because it drives their development programs, because they see the immediate return as well as the long-term return and things that are already there. So I'm particularly encouraged by the fact that the space industry as a whole has matured a lot in terms of these technologies. And when you have a mature technology, you can get much better at putting it to use globally in many, many different applications, in many different ways, many different sort of businesses. But it does rely upon, as you say, these ecosystems too. You need local users, you need local graduates. I mean, you'd like to think every ISU graduate, say from Chile or South Africa or, Fiji, would go back and say, we need to work and build this ecosystem. We need to get ingrained with our societies and our governments and be part of that solution and bring it to them and have them value it. But yeah, because I think that there's always this temptation to say, well, what's the huge investments we need to make to get to the next horizon, the next big jump in technology, and say, well, make the most of what you already have.
Cool, thank you. That's great, and I really like that you feel that ecosystems are not there yet. We do a lot, but really supporting local resources and really what can we do locally? What do we have locally? Not just like everybody looks to Silicon Valley, everybody looks to Austin, and how can we copy them? But every situation is different, and finding out what is the specifics, the value proposition of a region, maybe of a city, of a small city, of the people there, of the university there, the graduates, what is their passion, what are they really good at, what can they deliver. I think there's a big gap, and I really think the same. That's perfect. Great. I have five more questions, like maybe random, nothing really. I want to make this as a little a fun thing too. So, what are your favorite books?
I read. Yeah, I'm a complete magpie when it comes to books, but I do read a lot of science fiction, obviously, mainly hard and a little more speculative. I also read a lot of nonfiction, particularly around, I'd say the like pathways from the periphery, sort of, economic development. I love histories on space. I love how space came out of defense and military and still has that edge, but then has moved to a place where there's so many inspiring stories of those that have put it to use for, humanitarian purposes. I enjoy some of those. Yeah, no, but I generally I read really widely, and it's the same approach I take to film, frankly.
That's a
Yeah.
good. That brings me to the next question. What is your favorite sci-fi character you would like to be if you could choose one of them?
Wow, that's a fantastic question. Actually, I've always deeply admired Ripley from the Aliens franchise, and the reason why, obviously, she was a science officer. She's in science background, but she's a problem solver. She's an entrepreneur. She was always somebody where, when things happened to her, she could work. She's one of those people that could work with whatever she had, and I always found her really inspiring. She didn't take any shit, and she yeah, I've always found her a highly enjoyable science fiction character. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. That's a very interesting choice, actually. But good. So, who are the people you would say you're for you personally, the people you really need to follow for yourself? Do they give you value? If you like, on Twitter, on Facebook, in general, in the news, who are the one or two people you really like to follow and read their content?
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, in the space side, I'm a big believer in the value of public education in space, and I love great communicators that have also been successful. So maybe Kristen will appreciate this, but shout out to people like Commander Chris Hadfield, because it's a rare thing. It's that Renaissance approach of being very, very good at your job, very technically accomplished, but also fantastic communicator, and show that space could be fun and that space can be engaging. And I love watching listening to him on any sort of podcast or anything else that he's on, because he's so good at it. There's only is sort of sort of inspirations outside of space. I mentioned that one of my passions is actually in vaccine development, and obviously with COVID, it's never felt more resonant. So I really follow Bill Gates. I mean, if you want to look at sort of the billionaire tech, there's a lot of people who enjoy Elon Musk and others, and for obvious reasons. But the fact of I know how powerful the likes of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are, how important they've been working with industry and vaccine development and taking the fight to tropical diseases. But also because someone like Gates is very good at predicting what the next 5, 10, 20 years is going to look like, what the challenges are going to be, and how you bring certain technologies to bear and why they're going to matter. So someone like him I follow very closely, because he has bridged the commercial business world with the humanitarian world in a very big way, and understands how those things interact. So yeah, someone like him is definitely, especially at the moment, someone I'll always pay attention to.
Cool. I actually had the pleasure to work with Bill Gates in Germany. They had the project called Impatient Optimists a couple of years ago. They launched it in Germany. It was in Germany, very island success, but it was awesome. He was there, Melinda was there, and we had like the opportunity to chat with them. It was amazing. And what he's doing and how he pushes and how he uses his money. I just read today that people already again complain about his wealth, but he really does something with it. And it's really great. So yeah, it's awesome. Last question from my side. Everybody gets tips. Everybody tells you things along the way. And if you like more than 5 years professional experience, you had probably hundreds and thousands of tips from others. What are the things you'd never do again? What other people suggested you tried and you would never do it again? Is there anything specific that comes in mind that you say like, it was really not a learning, that was just a waste of energy and time?
Yeah, I would. I mean, anything that takes you away from your basic temperament and character, and this begins with a really big thing. I had the opportunity to work for a very large prime, a fantastic, prime in the space and aerospace industry, and I had worked with them for years. But I had the chance, and they offered me a role. But it was a very technical project management type role, very much dotting the I's, crossing the T type role. And I could see why they did that, because I had a background in the subject area that they were looking at. But I had the chance to consult before to potentially taking up the role full time. And after about a month, I knew it was not for me, because it just temperament. I'm more of a vision and an impact, and again, led by passion and want to build things and build people and move the needle forward. And this was much more sort of the real M&E, type thing. So it was like right company, right sector, right ideas, fantastic. But realized that the role that they had seen me in, the niche they'd seen me in, was not where I was going to be a good fit. It was not the best fit for me. And temperamentally, I don't think I would have lasted more than 6 months before moving on, because it just wasn't, I wasn't able to engage with that role in the way that I should be able to. So the lesson I learned from that was, you have to be able to say no. And even when it's somebody you really admire, sometimes you have to say no to this, but how about we keep talking and see if we can find a yes to something else with this. It'll be a much better fit for both of us. And I appreciate that can be a challenge. In the first 5 years of your post-university career, you very strongly tempted to say yes, especially to a company or an organization with big reputation. But you have to protect yourself as well, and protect them by being able to say no if they're moving you towards something you would not be a good fit.
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome, Anthony. That concludes my questions. I have nothing else to add. Christine, if you have something.
No, I loved your questions. Thanks. I guess the only other thing that sparked my attention is that I'm moving to more of a science communication role and kind of outreach. And one of the projects that we talk about a lot is this idea of citizen science. And so when you talked about all these big data sets and all this excess of data that there is there a place for I guess the idea of citizen science, so someone who's not necessarily technically trained or can participate, whether it's school classrooms, whether it's just someone at home, especially if it's something that can be done on their computer? Are there areas where people can contribute to the advancement of the space industry right now, even without any other technical training?
Yes, that's a great question. Absolutely. I can think of at least a couple of examples where citizen science in space has a couple of great organizations. So the first one is the USAID funded Youth Mappers. So what Youth Mappers do is that they take maps of regions from across the globe, and they help to map them using satellite imagery. So they map them and saying, okay, so this is actually these are roads, these are all these things, all these huge parts of the world that are actually, when they say mapped, often when people say something's been mapped, what they often mean in many remote parts of the world is there's been a satellite image of it. That is not mapping something. That doesn't tell you exactly who lives here, what's the infrastructure like, what's the strength of the environmental situation, all of those sorts of things where you need really, really detailed mapping. And so voluntary youth mapping is a fantastic thing to do. I really enjoyed it. The software is great now. It's a lot of fun. It gets connected to a global youth network, and you add some real value because you do it on scale, and it can really help to build up much more detailed areas of the world, particularly those that are recovering in post-conflict situations where the maps have all changed. where boundaries have changed. The second one is look up an outfit called Adventure Scientists. I love these folks. It's a very simple idea. It's essentially, if you're a job in sort of research or academic scientist and you are on holiday and you are, as often adventurous scientists will do, you are deciding that you would like to hike to very remote parts of the world. What adventure scientists do is say, well, actually, there's almost certainly somebody somewhere in the world who could really do with some data collection in the area that you're going. And because it's very remote and takes a lot of adventure to get there, would you be willing to participate in some data collection and combine science with your adventure? And I think that's great. And that's the kind of practical way, because it's really enjoyable. You're contributing to something, and the networks it gives you, and potentially even future employment. It's one of those things where you really enjoy it in the near to medium term, and then long term it can pay off in ways because of the networks you make and the track record you build. So both those I'd recommend.
Awesome, thank you. Those are pretty much all my questions. Do you have any concluding remarks that you want to kind of sum up a message of hope for people right now, maybe feeling a little bit tense or feeling a little bit unmotivated or just kind of blah? I mean, it's pouring rain here, so that could be contributing to my blah feeling today. But what would you, kind of a message of hope to send to anyone listening?
Well, I certainly know the challenge, and I've also felt that same sluggishness, to be honest, and that kind of Groundhog Day feeling we're all having. I think the message of hope, though, is it's true. There is no better time than to plan your future from here, and the thing that's going to get you through this period is definitely going to be your passions. So now we need to do whatever you're indulging yourself the majority of the day. Think about how from here you can map that to a future job that connects space in some way, and that may give you some hope and some enjoyment. And you'll be surprised that this could be that little pause in time that you needed to break out of whatever conventional pathway you were contemplating, if your heart wasn't really in it. And good luck out there.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.